Hello Idle Hero fans, thank you for joining me today for a discussion video that covers an issue that's come up a little bit recently with the private server, and that is surrounding the fact of whether or not we should be doing balance changes for the game. And by balance changes, we just pretty much mean whether or not certain heroes should receive nerfs or buffs depending on what end of the spectrum they're on. And I'd like to open this up by saying that when buffs and nerfs are usually talked about, sometimes people get the idea of like what kind of recently happened to Norma, where Norma went from a useless champion to pretty overpowered, at least for the mid game, by one ginormous upgrade, taking her ability from 100% heal to a 400% heal, which is just absurd. Now, what I think we're talking about when it comes to balance changes is more of a smaller scale thing and only for outlier cases. So, for example, Faceless, or a Flame Strike, is beyond the pale when it comes to how strong she is. She is easily the best hero in the game, bar none. And her power is so much higher than everyone else's that you can't ignore it. So, ultimately, in the end of this private server, once a lot of people start to get to 9-star heroes, inevitably everyone's going to have Flame Strike on their team just by default. You're going to be forced to just to stay competitive. Now, in order to avoid this, we can tweak these stats a little bit. Now, again, not talking about things like the Norma buff, because the Norma buff was just stupid in my opinion. But what we can do are things like tone down ability skills from, say, something like 94% to 90% even, just dropping like a 4% or 6% off of the extra damage that you get from the second part. Or something like taking like 5 or 6% of her total HP off. Something very small, but indeed moving towards a more balanced hero. And I believe this is an important thing because right now the server is pretty accelerated, and by that I mean a lot of people are going to be gaining 6, 7, 8, and eventually 9-star heroes at a pretty rapid pace. And with that being true, we're going to hit the end game pretty fast. And hitting the end game pretty fast, where an established meta already exists with blatant outliers such as Flame Strike and Asmodel, for example, when you know these characters are as far ahead as they are, everyone's going to go for them. They have to. There's no choice. So in order to try to diversify the end game, I prefer that we try to dial back some of these stats. Again, very minute ways, like not going crazy with this, but to take 6 or 7% from HP, or like 4 and 5% from damage, just to bring them back in line a little bit with other heroes. Now, this also doesn't have to do with just the end game, in my opinion, but it also has to do with the early game, because right now, pretty much the only people who can compete for like the top spots in the Tower of Oblivion are people who have Flame Strike, and that's pretty busted. That's such a RNG way to determine who can do well in this game. Now, of course, you're never going to be able to get rid of all RNG. Of course, that is the nature of the game, but we can minimize it a little bit, at least, by making these heroes not as strong. And that works the other way, too. When you look at heroes like Bade, for example, people who have gotten Bade are just screwed over. They're just a shitty hero. It's fodder. That's all you can do with it. If we give the opposite treatment to him, or maybe you give him 7 to 8% extra health, or 3 to 4% extra damage, or adjustments that are small like that, might push these characters into more of a contestant role early in the game and late in the game as well, so that RNG isn't as such a huge factor at crippling new players when they make teams, and it doesn't stagnate the meta late game. Because right now, I can guarantee you it's going to be the same thing as an official, where everyone runs the same heroes at the end of the game, because that's what you have to do to stay competitive. And I'd like to avoid that. Now, I know there are some drawbacks to this. The biggest one that gets brought up is that it wouldn't be the same game, and that is true to an extent, but ultimately this is an evolving game, much like League of Legends, where patches will continue to come forward. So the game you know and love today won't be the game you play tomorrow, or might not be the game you play tomorrow, and it definitely won't be the same game you play in a year. So I think if we have to accept those changes anyway, we might as well bring ourselves to make better ones, quicker ones, now that we have access to that capacity. it wasn't an option when we had the official server. People had to simply give feedback to the devs, and if it fell on deaf ears, it fell on deaf ears. But that's not the case anymore. So I'd really like to seize that opportunity. Now, again, there are going to be people who don't agree with this, and that's fine. I get what you're saying. But I just want to see who exactly is in favor of these things. So I have got a straw poll that I'll put in the description below, as well as I'll pin a comment with it in it. But I want you guys to vote on whether or not you think there should be balance changes, there should not be balance changes, or if you just don't care either way. And I just want to ballpark where this sits with a large portion of the community. Now, don't mistake this poll as an indicator of whether or not this will happen. This is just me collecting data. This has nothing to do with the actual outcome of this decision. Meh ultimately has to make these choices, and whether or not he chooses to or chooses not to may or may not have anything to do with the poll. So this is just kind of a curiosity. Just trying to collect samples to see where people lie, which side of the fence they're really on. And even if you vote yes on this poll, nothing may happen. Or even if you vote no on this poll, it may happen anyway. So don't try to think of this as an all-encompassing decision. Just try to give your opinion and be as objective as you can. Because ultimately we're just working to make this game as enjoyable for everyone as possible. And I believe that balance changes can help achieve that. Thank you for listening, guys, and please remember to vote. Have a good night.